We welcome in a very special guest today, Emmanuel Berbari with Fordham Athletic Director Ed Kull. Joining us, Wake Forest football head coach Dave Clawson, also a former Fordham football head coach. Dave, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you guys and a lot of great memories from my time at Rose Hill.
Coach, how's everything holding up this fall?
I mean, it's been good so far. We've been able to keep our team together, relatively COVID-free. We've been able to play 3 games. We're hoping to play 8 more. But it's a daily challenge to try to keep our players safe, constantly respect the protocols. And this is a dangerous virus. So we want to keep our guys healthy first off, and then playing games and being able to practice and be together is a bonus, especially after being apart for so many months.
Wanted to go over to the Fordham side as well, having Ed here. You were with Fordham from 1999 to 2003. What did your time with Fordham and the football program mean to your career?
Well, first of all, I'll always be grateful to Frank McLaughlin and Jeff Gray for giving me a chance to be a head football coach. And to be in New York City and at a place with the history of Fordham, it was an honor. I was a very young head coach when I was hired. I had just turned 31, and I learned a lot of lessons the hard way. I always tell the joke that I was such a good head coach my first year at Fordham that we didn't win a game. And I learned a lot, and Frank and Jeff were patient with me and allowed me to learn on the job. But I had a great staff. We had players that were able to show a tremendous amount of grit and not get discouraged by the 0-11, 3-8 start. And then in 2001, we completely flipped the script. That year, beating Bucknell in 2001 was a huge win for us, and we went on to win every game for the rest of that year, and then leading to our Patriot League championship in 2002, and then 9-3 in 2003. So I look at it as I wish I had enjoyed it more when I was there, but I loved Fordham. I love what the school stood for. The people, Father O'Hare, just really special people, and was a great experience.
And Ed, winning a Patriot League title like that, what a major launching pad for the program.
Yeah, I mean, I would even say, Coach, it's funny to hear Coach Clawson speak about kind of that building process of a challenging 0-win season to a 3-win season. And I know you got to know Coach Conlon very well as he enters into his 3rd year here, though we're in a little bit of suspended fall, hopefully for the spring season. It's kind of that building process for Coach Conlon, instilling his own culture, his own environment, his own philosophies, and also recruiting his own kind of players. Coach Clawson, maybe you talk a little bit about kind of that, establishing your own model, your footprint, your attitude, your personality to a team. I'm sure that's a lot of the initial seasons at Fordham for you, and establishing a culture of success the way you did.
Well, one of the big challenges was I was the 3rd head coach in 3 years. So there was guys that signed up to play for Coach Quintero, and then signed up to play for Coach O'Keefe. And then suddenly this 31-year-old coach who's never been a head coach shows up and has a different way of doing things. And the first 2 years were very challenging. There was a number of players who didn't buy in. And that's always a hard and difficult process. But the ones that did really became the core of our football team for the next 4 years. And I'm always grateful to those young men for sticking with me, and I'm sure I made a bunch of mistakes, but we really got better together. I think I improved as a head coach, our coordinators improved as coordinators, and our players improved. So we all kind of blossomed together. But there was definitely some tough lessons along the way. But I think that made us enjoy the success of 01, 02, and 03 even more, because it wasn't handed to us. It was a struggle, and we had to work extremely hard together to get to the point of the program that we could win a championship, put rings on our fingers, and certainly one of the highlights was beating Northeastern in the first round of the playoffs in 2002.
Coach, one of your players, Nick Brandomarty, who unfortunately passed away with the 9/11 attacks, the new football offices at Fordham, he's getting honored with his name associated with those offices. What does that name, Nick Brandomarty, mean to you?
Well, Nick, there's a handful of players that in your career that the relationship becomes much more than football. And, Nick right away in 99 when we got there was one of those guys that was just rock solid character-wise. He was one of those guys that everybody loved him. He just had one of those personalities that old, young, white, black, offense, defense, the people in the office. And then our second year, Nick was really going to have a chance to play a lot and competing to be our starting fullback. And then he had a concussion and was ruled medically that he couldn't play. And so we invited Nick to join the coaching staff. So Nick became a student assistant coach. And Nick was studying business and wanted to go to Wall Street. And he said, Coach, I notice a lot of the things that you do are things we're learning in business school here about leadership. Would you mind if you and I would have coffee every Wednesday? So Nick used to come in my office every Wednesday and would sit for a half an hour. And Nick was one of those guys who was 21 going on 41. He was mature for his age. He saw the big picture. And Nick and I would have a cup of coffee and just talk about life every Wednesday before meetings for a half an hour. And then Nick graduated and went on and was going to be a great success professionally. And because of the first two seasons, we were 0-11 and 3-8, a lot of the players left the program without great feelings about Fordham. And that's just what happens when you don't have wins in a winning culture. I think a lot of players maybe don't have the experience you would like, but Nick, I think, understood what we were doing and what we were trying to build. And in 2001, our last scrimmage, we invited alumni and donors back for. And the only player that came back from the 99 and 2000 teams was Nick Brandomarty.
Wow.
He was right on the sidelines. And we were practicing on the turf field, behind the Lombardi Center there. And when the practice was over, I'd always walk down that alley towards Jack Coffey Field, and Nick walked with me. And, we were talking, and before he left, and he said, hey, Coach, I just want you to know. He goes, I love you. And I said, Nick, I love you too. And I think that's the first player I ever had that told me that he loved me. And, a couple weeks later, he was dead. And, but I always am grateful that my last face-to-face conversation with Nick Brandomarty was a player telling his old coach and a coach telling his old player that they loved each other. And, so that's my lasting memory of Nick, which I'm grateful to have that memory.
Wow, Coach. I mean, that is powerful and that's tremendous. And I did not know that story. You and I have not had that conversation. And I've never had unfortunately the opportunity to meet Nick, but I've gotten the time to spend with some of his former teammates in this process, including some family members, and they're very excited about this honoring. And unfortunately, we're not gonna be able to do it in the fall because of our suspended season, but we're excited to probably do that in the spring when we can get folks back on campus. So between the Brandomarty family and some of your other former players, Sean Clare, Pat Muth, Chris Breen, Sean Farrell, that core group has been essential in terms of working with us and the current football program on this honoring. And they speak so eloquently and passionately, of course, about their relationship with Nick and what he meant to them as a teammate, but also very much, Coach, about your culture and environment and what you built there and what you instilled in them and what it means to them in their professional life. So I just want to add that, it's been incredible to learn about Nick and the family, but those guys really talk about that whole family atmosphere you put together, that you established with the program, and what fond memories they have of Fordham and playing football here at Rose Hill because of you and what you built. And I just give you kudos to all that. It speaks volume of who you are and the type of man and coach you are.
Well, thank you, but the honor was mine. Those guys were incredible leaders. Chris Breen, Sean Clare, Tony Downs, Mark Carney. Those guys were just rock solid. And to go through the years that we did and have those guys stay dedicated and committed, I think speaks volumes. I mean, it was my job. that was my responsibility. Those were student athletes that had a choice. And we were just lucky that it was just a special time and a unique collection of coaches and players that really, got through hard times together and came out of it in a much better place.
Coach, this year marks 50 years since varsity football returned to Rose Hill, and on homecoming in 1970, the team, the school honored the recent passing at the time of Vince Lombardi. It goes without saying what a massive figure he was and really still is. When you hear Vince Lombardi, what's the first thought that pops into your mind?
Well, first of all, just all the hours and time that I spent in the Lombardi Center at Fordham. I mean, countless hours. And when I first got the job, there was a book that came out by David Moranis called When Pride Still Mattered.
Yes.
And it's a great story of the life of Vince Lombardi, from his times growing up in Brooklyn to the impact that the Jesuits at Fordham had on his life philosophy and his coaching philosophy. In the very first year I was there, I bought that book for our entire staff and I made it mandatory reading. And what always struck me about that book is, number one, just the impact that the Jesuits had on Vince's life, that Fordham had on his life. And that's a legacy that Fordham and Fordham football continues to have. The second part of it is Wellington Mara was still alive at the time. So I used to sit in the Rose Hill gym and watch basketball games next to Wellington Mara. And I would just drill him with questions about what was it like then and about the book and Vince Lombardi, because Vince was the offensive coordinator for the Giants for the Mara family. And it was just a living history. And the one thing in the book that always struck me when I was at Fordham is, I think it was Marie Lombardi at the end of Vince's life said all Vince ever wanted out of life was to be the head coach at Fordham. And I would always say that, the Super Bowl trophy, the symbol of excellence of football in our country, the man who's named after that wanted my job. And that was a very humbling responsibility with the legacy of Vince Lombardi and the 7 blocks of granite. And we used to invite those guys back to practice. I mean, Al Bart was still alive when I was there, and we invited him to spring practice one year. And what a special moment that was. And there were so many guys at the time that played for Vince Lombardi at Fordham during the 50s when he was a assistant coach. So it was the impact and the shadow of Vince Lombardi certainly impacted us every day that we walked into those football offices.
Yeah, Coach, a couple of weeks ago, Coach Conlon and I made a trip to Mount Olivet Cemetery in Red Bank, New Jersey. We went to the gravesite of Vince Lombardi in honor of the anniversary of the 50 years of his passing. And it just it really is surreal to think of the life and the career that man had. And he passed away young, 57 years old, extremely young. And obviously is defined as the coach, as, when you talk about coaches and Mount Rushmore and football being the most popular sport in our country. And, just had to chat with Coach Conlon, and, similar to your finding about that book, everybody references that book to me, which is incredible. And I think just what he represents to all coaches and to all figures, everybody has a favorite quote or a favorite line from him or a favorite, story about him that they think about. It really is surreal and hard to believe what an impact that man has had on all of sports, and how blessed we are that he's a Fordham alum and that he came through, New York City the way he did.
So, yeah, and I even got into reading a lot of his speeches, and he was very popular on the speaking circuit. And just one of the things that always impacted me is the courage it takes to be an achiever. And you hear that a lot now. Different coaches will say, mediocre people don't like high achievers and high achievers don't like mediocre people. And I think a lot of Lombardi's teaching was to have the courage to be great, to achieve, and don't apologize for having ambition and having goals. And that was very appropriate at Fordham, because when we were 0-11 and 3-8, we would remind those guys every team meeting that the goal was to be champions. And I think sometimes when I would say that, when we were 0-9, 0-10, 0-11, guys would roll their eyes and laugh under their breath and think, is this guy crazy? But when we won the championship, all those guys who were part of that 0-11 team, they bought into that this was always the goal, and we always believed we could do that despite nobody else thinking we could. And in some ways, the memory of Lombardi inspired us back then. So it's, again, it's very relevant. And, it just, again, Fordham is such a special place. But you certainly read that book and you know the impact that Fordham University had on the life of Vince Lombardi and his coaching philosophy, and continues to impact Fordham football today.
Coach, appreciate you taking a couple of minutes. Great reflections, and enjoy the rest of the season.
Thanks so much for including me and having me. Always consider myself a Fordham Ram.